We've arrived at part 6 of the urinary system, and we're on page here 967. And on the preceding page, they go over in the text some details about the myogenic mechanism and the tubuloglomerular feedback. The first one is rather simple, and I've already explained it, and it basically just means that if the pressure is too high in the afferent arteriole, the afferent arteriole has the capability of contracting and protecting the downstream capillaries. This one, number 2, is sufficiently complex and requires signaling chemicals, essentially ATP. Then I'm going to wait and go over the diagram, and then there is another text part in which we look at the mechanism for all of this. Okay, so let's take a look at this chart over here. We're looking at page, as indicated again, 967. And this is table, or rather figure 2512, the physiological mechanisms regulating glomerular filtration. Okay, so we're beginning up here at the very top, and we're beginning with the idea of low systemic blood pressure. Another thing that can be at play here is a low concentration of sodium in the diet. Right, so we spoke of that before, that on a hot summer day you've had a drink of water, but it doesn't seem to quite quench your thirst. And it's because there's not enough electrolytes in pure water. And so you might need to have some broth. And that can make a really big difference. Or add some salt, or have a sports drink that has sodium and potassium in it. Matters a great deal. So they have some different columns here. There is the myogenic mechanism on the left. In this column we have a tubuloglomerular mechanism. There's a feedback mechanism here. Over here we have hormones that are at play. And then over here we have systemic blood pressure. And at this level over here, the neural controls. So usually we think in terms of the sympathetic nervous system. So let's take a look here. When we have low blood pressure, and we end up with low glomerular filtration rate. And the afferent arteriole can sense this pressure. It's fully relaxed, and as a result, the smooth muscle is lacking a stretch, low stretch, they indicate here. And as a result of that, we're going to have the release of renin. This is part of what occurs here, is the release of renin. But before we get to that, the vasoconstriction of the arterioles can begin even before this happens, specifically. Okay, so we can allow more blood to flow into the glomerulus. So with lower and lower blood pressure, the afferent arteriole is relaxing and relaxing more to let more of the blood come in. And that should increase the glomerular filtration rate, but there are limits to that. Okay, so in the absence of other mechanisms, we're going to have to go over here, and we're going to have to take a look and see what happens. Ultimately, we're looking for renin to be released from the system. Okay, so over here we have a completely different mechanism. We have a decrease in glomerular filtration rate, low blood pressure. The filtration rate is low. If there's any sodium, it's going to get taken up. And it's going to get taken up in the nephron long before we end up at the macula-densa cells, at the juxtaglomerular complex of the kidney. And if that happens, then there's going to be no signal, no more ATP, a lack of ATP. So they say here that there's a release of the vasoactive chemical, and basically it's going to be inhibited. So as long as this is being released, we're not going to end up with renin being released. But when this slows down, it's inhibited. That's where we get the renin mechanism. Okay, and vasodilation of the afferent arterioles, and we should be getting renin and angiotensin out of this deal. Okay, and that's yet to come over here. So they're listing this basically as a as sort of a hormone and other chemicals. Okay, so we have the loss of ATP. We're stimulating the granular cells of the afferent arteriole. That's a part of the juxtaglomerular complex. So here's our renin. We get activation of angiotensinogen from the liver. It's actually a double activation, one with renin, another with ACE at the lungs, angiotensin converting enzyme. We get converted to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is extremely powerful, and it has a dual function. One causes the release of aldosterone, and with the release of aldosterone, we get to spare sodium. Okay, so sodium is pumped out of the potential urine, out of the filtrate, in exchange for potassium. Now we have sodium in the extracellular fluid, and that makes it high tonicity, and we get ADH to cause water then to flow into the blood. They left that out of the diagram, and we have an increase in blood volume. Okay, that's an important detail. Renin has another effect, and that's that it acts throughout the body peripherally to increase peripheral resistance. So that means that the arterioles throughout the body are contracting just a little bit overall and increasing the blood pressure. By increasing the blood pressure and the blood volume, now we have the option to have a good cardiac output, a good venous return, resulting in a good cardiac output. Helping us with all of this is going to be the sympathetic nervous system. So sometimes when we're really thirsty and we're low on sodium, there is a certain, how shall I say, anxiety about low blood volume. And it causes us to become psychologically more activated. And this is also going to be adding here to the vasoconstriction. So all of that is coming together for this final outcome, increasing systemic blood pressure. Okay, so then we press on here to the more detailed description of the Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone system. And we have to understand both the direct activity of afferent arteriole activation. So the afferent arteriole can directly be releasing renin simply because the blood pressure is too low. With low blood pressure, the granular cells at the afferent arteriole relax and renin is released. A secondary process here again, and this is a little bit confusing, so I just warn you that the idea here is that the macula densa cells at the end of the loop of Henle are supposed to be using ATP to pump sodium. If the blood pressure is so low and the filtrate is moving so slowly that all the sodium has been pumped and there's nothing left for the macula densa cells, they stop their activity. There's no ATP, and that is what causes the granular cells. Here they use the term that it may cause it, and in fact it does cause it. It is ATP. Okay, that is the signal. 2007, there are papers written in the literature. And so if you read those papers, I had to bring my own fellow faculty up to speed on this one, and it was fun to do because I brought the papers out and we all examined them and we all agreed, oh yeah, that's why the book has changed its song. So in 2007, all of our newest editions had had this new outcome. So the idea that the reduction of ATP is what's actually going to be acting upon the blood pressure with renin-angiotensin and aldosterone. Okay.